Football remembers its icons, the heroes who dominate headlines, the legends whose names echo through generations. But some figures, no matter how brilliant, slip through history's cracks. Martin Peters wasn't just a footballer, he was a footballing blueprint. Sir Alf Ramsey once said he was 10 years ahead of his time, and yet time would be his cruelest enemy. He was England's secret weapon in the 1966 World Cup, scoring in the final, yet his name is rarely mentioned among the greats. From West Ham's golden era to record-breaking transfers and European success, he shaped the modern attacking midfielder before the world even realized what he was. But football is often unkind to visionaries. His intelligence, his movement, his ability to see the game before anyone else, that same sharp mind would eventually betray him. Struck by Alzheimer's in his final years, Peters lost the very thing that defined him. His legacy, much like his memory, began to fade. Yet does he truly deserve to be forgotten? This is the story of football's lost genius, a career that shaped the game, only to be overshadowed by time. If you believe stories like this should be told, then subscribe now, because some legacies deserve to be remembered. And as we uncover Peters' journey, the question remains, how did a World Cup hero become football's most overlooked legend? In an era when English football thrived on grit and power, Martin Peters was an anomaly. A midfielder who didn't just play the game, he anticipated it. His movement was ghost-like, drifting into spaces before defenders even realized the danger. A player ahead of his time, yet often overlooked. Born in Plaistow, East London, in 1943, Peters was a product of West Ham United's famed academy. Under the tutelage of Ron Greenwood, he developed a style that defied English football's rigid norms. Greenwood saw something different, once remarking, "Martin could play anywhere. He was the future of football." And he wasn't wrong. By 1962, Peters had broken into the West Ham first team, and by 1965, he was lifting the European Cup Winners' Cup. Yet despite his growing reputation, he was a footballer without definition. Too intelligent to be just a winger, too refined to be a pure midfielder, too creative to be a conventional goalscorer. He was the prototype of the modern attacking midfielder, decades before the role even had a name. Then came 1966. England needed something different. Alf Ramsey's wingless wonders relied on control, tactical flexibility, and off-the-ball intelligence. Qualities Peters embodied, but even as he earned his place on football's biggest stage, history would soon diminish his role in England's most celebrated triumph. But how does a player who scored in a World Cup final end up in the shadows of history? July 30th, 1966. Wembley Stadium, the greatest moment in English football history. A nation held its breath as England faced West Germany in the World Cup final. Jeff Hurst may have stolen the headlines, but without Martin Peters, the story could have been different. With the game locked at 1-1, Peters did what he always did best, arrived exactly when it mattered. As the ball ricocheted off a German defender, he instinctively placed himself in the perfect position, firing home England's second goal. For a brief moment, he was England's hero. A nation erupted. The Jules Rimet trophy was within reach. But history can be cruel. Just minutes later, Wolfgang Weber's late equalizer shattered the moment. England still won, of course, thanks to Hurst's now legendary hat trick. But Peters' contribution, it faded. His goal became an afterthought, overshadowed by the iconic "they think it's all over" moment. Even in victory, Peters remained in the background. No statue, no golden narrative, no eternal replays. While Bobby Moore lifted the trophy and Hurst's name echoed through time, Peters remained the forgotten man of '66, a World Cup winner, yet never truly recognized as one of its defining figures. How does a player who changed English football become an unsung hero in his own era? A World Cup winner, an England regular, a player at the heart of one of the most dominant teams in the country. Yet in 1970, Martin Peters did something that sent shockwaves through English football. He left West Ham, but it wasn't just any transfer. It was part of a deal that would become one of the most talked about swaps in football history. West Ham traded Peters to Tottenham Hotspur in exchange for Jimmy Greaves, a legend, but one nearing the end of his career. The reaction? Outrage. Greaves was a goal machine, but he was also 30 and on the decline. Peters, at 26, was in his prime. For many West Ham fans, it felt like a betrayal. But Peters, he thrived at Spurs. Under Bill Nicholson, he reinvented himself. More than just a goal scorer, he became a leader. He lifted the League Cup twice and played a key role in Tottenham's 1972 UEFA Cup victory. Yet no matter how well he performed, he was never quite given the status of the game's elite. Why? Perhaps because he was never a showman. While others grabbed headlines with flair and controversy, Peters simply played. He wasn't outspoken. He wasn't flashy. He just delivered. And in a football world that often values drama over discipline, that came at a cost. How does a player who never put a foot wrong end up overlooked? Success at Tottenham solidified Martin Peters as one of English football's most consistent midfielders. Yet while his quality never wavered, recognition always seemed to evade him. As the 1970s progressed, football evolved, and so did its icons. New stars emerged, flashier, louder, marketable. But Peters remained the same, efficient, intelligent, but understated. By the late 1970s, his influence at Spurs began to fade. Football was changing, and Peters, now in his 30s, found himself gradually pushed aside. Tottenham, looking toward the future, brought in younger talents. For a player who had once been described as 10 years ahead of his time, the football world was suddenly moving on without him. In 1975, he left White Hart Lane, signing for Norwich City, a move that went under the radar. While still a top-flight club, Norwich was not where World Cup winners were expected to finish their careers. But Peters remained professional, delivering consistently for the Canaries, even earning their Player of the Year award twice. It was a quiet brilliance, one that often went unnoticed outside of East Anglia. England, too, moved on. By 1974, Peters was out of the national team, his final cap coming without much fanfare. There was no grand farewell, no hero's send-off, just a slow, silent departure from the international stage. How does a player who once defined English football disappear from its memory so quickly? Football rarely pauses to honor those who shaped its past. Martin Peters, a World Cup hero, a revolutionary midfielder, a player ahead of his time, yet his name rarely enters conversations about England's greatest. Why? Perhaps it was his quiet nature. He never sought the spotlight, never indulged in the controversies or theatrics that make legends immortal in media narratives. He simply played, delivered, and left. Unlike his 1966 teammates, Bobby Moore, Jeff Hurst, or Gordon Banks, Peters never had a defining club that fully embraced his legacy. West Ham moved on. Tottenham, too. Norwich appreciated him, but history rarely remembers players outside the top clubs. Even after retirement, Peters remained in football's periphery. While some of his peers took up media roles or managerial careers, Peters lived away from the noise, only occasionally appearing at commemorative events. But even those moments faded with time. When England's 1966 World Cup squad was celebrated in later years, Peters was present, yet always in the background. His achievements stood undeniable, yet they never commanded the reverence they deserved. How does a player with such a monumental career become an afterthought in the sport he helped define? The reality is harsh. Football forgets. And for Martin Peters, time erased his contributions faster than it should have. Football moves forward, always searching for the next superstar, the next icon, the next name to fill headlines. In that relentless march, even legends are left behind. Martin Peters, a World Cup winner, an innovator, a midfielder ahead of his time, should have been immortalized among England's finest. Instead, his name lingers in the shadows of history, remembered by those who saw him play, but rarely spoken of by the generations that followed. It's a harsh reality. The game remembers those who stay in the spotlight, those who chase the attention, those whose legacies are reinforced by endless debates and media narratives. But what about the silent geniuses, the ones who let their football speak, who never demanded the limelight? Martin Peters was once described as being 10 years ahead of his time, but maybe that was the problem. Perhaps the game was never ready to truly appreciate him. So how many more players like him have been lost to time? If these stories fascinate you, If you believe football's forgotten icons deserve their place in history, then this is the place for you. Subscribe and join us as we uncover the untold stories, the triumphs, the tragedies, the legacies that deserve to be remembered. Because football history is more than just the names we hear every day.